The next thing we're going to mark up are the links. Now to do the links, we need to learn two new things and some accessibility issues. So one is nesting. A nesting is when one HTML element goes inside another one. So here we have a paragraph, and you can find your paragraph on your code. And notice inside this we have a link. So here's the link inside this paragraph. We want to make sure that the entire link goes inside both the opening tag and the closing tag. So what we need to decide is what we want to be linked on. So it said you can read the entire article, and then here's the name of the article. Improving Students' Learning with Effective Learning Techniques, Promising Directions from Cognitive and Educational Psychology. And we are going to be linking to a copy of this entire article, and so we're going to have this whole thing be the link. So notice that it's all inside the paragraph. So we can put the opening link tag at the beginning of that, and the opening link, and a link tag is an A tag. It stands for anchor, and that's what it started out a long time ago. And then the closing link tag will go at the end of what we want it to be there. Now notice what just happened here. Notice that this word just wrapped and went down on the next line. So one of our style rules is to keep lines to a maximum of 80 characters. So this is one thing that I like to do. I like to set up the size of my editor so that it ends right at 80 characters. And if I go down here and I get to where I've got a really long line, I can look down here at the bottom and it tells me what column I'm on. I'm in column 82, so I want to get it to column 80 there. And when I'm on column 80, and then I can see that everything over that, anything that wraps, goes beyond column 80. Or if you don't wrap your text, it goes past it. By the way, if you want to test if things wrap, you can choose in View whether to use word wrap or not. So that's just something that's available in your editor, whether you have it wrapping or not. So I keep the wrapping on, and then I see when it happens. So right here, what just happened is just that little tag pushed this line over 80. So to keep this at 80, I'm going to go back to here and put an enter. And then, so now I've got an enter there, and this looks funny, so I'm going to delete it. And this one wrapped. Okay, so now I've got things back in order where everything's less than 80. Now also notice that I've got a URL down here that itself is longer than 80. And so what it says to do is avoid lines that are greater than 80. In this case, where you have a single URL that's greater than 80, you can't break it. It needs to all be on the same line. So this case, the line will be longer than 80, and we won't worry about it. We're still doing what we can. All right, so we've defined the text that we want to be inside that A link. Now you want the text to be informative. You don't want it to be something like click here. You want it to be more meaningful. It takes a little bit more thought, but it's more meaningful for your users. That's both just regular good practice and accessibility practice. It happens that both of those are very common, that they happen together, that good accessibility standards are also good coding standards. So choose good text, something that's meaningful. So there's what we want to be the link. Now if we save this and go over and refresh, nothing happens. And when we click on this, we click on that link, nothing happens. So we need to do something more. And here's where we add an attribute. Now attributes always go inside the opening tag. And so there's our opening tag. We're going to put an attribute, and attributes follow this policy. You type the attribute, and the one we need for an A link is href. Notice my editor knows and recognizes that, and I can just push enter and it'll do it for me. And in fact, my editor adds the equal and the quotes. And that's what you want with an attribute. You want the name of the attribute followed by an equal, and then inside quotes you're going to put the value. And the href value on a link is the entire URL. So here I get that entire URL, and I'm going to take it out of there and I'm going to put it in my href tag. All right, now what happens now when I save it and I go and refresh? Notice what I get. It turns to a color, and I'm going to enlarge that just a bit. It turns to a color and it's underlined. And that's the style you get automatically from a link. And now when I click on it, what happens? It's turning, and it goes to that location. All right, now you have some options. Notice that it replaced this text, so it displayed in self. It just displayed right where it is. So I have a choice to choose to add an attribute target. Notice if you have more than one attribute, you just put them one after another. So another attribute that you can use with an A is target, and the value for this one is, the default is self. So if you wanted to open up right where you are, then you don't change it. You don't even have to set it. But if you wanted to open up in a different page, you can put _blank as the value for the target attribute. Notice how attributes change the way things work. So now when I click on this link, it loads it. It still opens that exact same page, but it opens it up in a different tab. So there you get the choice to control that. It also notice that it changed the color of the of the link. So because it's now been visited, so the color will change. So you have that choice to choose to let it open up in the same tab or to open up in a second tab. And that's the target attribute. Notice that this attribute is optional. It's not required for good code. It's not required for accessibility. It's just a matter of choice of what you want the control over where it opens up. The href is required, and for the link to work you need it. Another thing that's really important is often you talk about URLs without this HTTP, and this is a problem for a link. If you've forgotten that part and you refresh, notice what happens. It still looks like a link, but now when I click on it, it opens up and says I can't find your file. And everything is there except the HTTP. And so that's a big deal. Make sure that you get the complete link, and otherwise it won't be able to find it. So be sure and include that protocol as well. All right, now for accessibility reasons, we want to add one more attribute, and this is the title attribute. And in here, we want to put some information about where that link is going to go. Now, this is good information for everybody, but it's one of our tools for accessibility to make it accessible to somebody who's viewing the web page by using a screen reader. So here I said, and you notice that I've already put this text in here under title. I've said, go to the complete article in Sage Journals. And that's information for that screen reader. So now when I refresh, notice nothing shows up here. If I hover, it shows up. And that's what the title attribute does in most browsers. And the title attribute is a global attribute. So if you want this to come up on any element, say an image or a heading, if you want that pop-up information, you can put that over any element by simply adding the title attribute. Now when I click on it, nothing changes. It still opens a new tab and it goes to that web page just fine. So it works the same, but it provides that information both when you hover over it and when somebody's doing a screen reader, they'll get that information spoken to them. All right, so that's how we do an A link, and this is how we add attributes. They go all inside, one after another, inside that opening A tag, right? So that opening A tag starts with the less than sign, ends with the greater than sign. It just all of a sudden got very large because we added attributes inside of them. Each attribute starts with the attribute name, then an equal sign, and then the value in quotes. All right, we want to get rid of any notation. So, and the other thing to be sure, nesting. We have both the opening and the closing tag inside the paragraph tag. All right, let's do a couple more. Here's the next one, and this one is go to the summary of the article in the journalist resource. And so now I'm going to go ahead, what I want to be the link is the journalist resource. I'm going to put my opening tag there and my closing A tag there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with attributes. I'm going to do an href, and have it be equal to this entire URL. And I am going to do target equals blank, so I'm just going to copy that from up here. And I'll make all of these be consistent, that when they click a link to go outside of our website, that it'll go somewhere else. And then I also want to put the title, but notice that since titles are informative, it will be this title right here, the one that goes with this link is what I'll put it there. And then I'll get rid of my notes right here. Okay, one more. Go ahead, I'll pause and finish this last one, and you go ahead and do it on your end. Okay, now I've added those 3 different links that are inside the paragraph, and notice that they're all the way inside those paragraphs. Oops, I forgot my closing A tag. That would be bad. Make sure you get both the opening and the closing. There you go. All right, make sure that that opening and closing are in all the way inside. When you're nesting, you need to make sure that both the beginning and the end are all the way inside. And now I save that. And now notice how those links are in there, and each one will take us to a different location. And we can click on them. We want to make sure that they all work. So we click on them and make sure they go to the right location. And there we have them both opening to where we expected them. So be sure and check where they go to. All right, now notice that we have problems with the length. So what we can do, remember that that HTML gets rid of the white space. It replaces any white space with a single space. So I can go ahead and in here say, well, I'm going to just, for my line, I'm going to start moving these each on individual lines. Now notice, I don't want to put a carriage return inside quotes, but I can go ahead and put a carriage line where there are attributes, right? So there's my A tag, and then I can say, okay, so now I've got everything set up there, and now all of those are on, and even though I put those on different lines, so I save that and they're on different lines, and I come back and refresh. Notice there's no change here because that white space isn't shown up on the web page. So I can make this all the way I want it. And now notice my whole A tag is, and my editor indented. You can indent or not. That's up to you to keep that clear. And I want to go down here, and on this same one, I'm going to have an A tag. Notice it did not indent that time. So I don't know the difference in that, but you would want to be consistent. One thing you can do is you can highlight a whole bunch and do Shift Tab to untab it, or you can tab to tab in the whole section. Now notice, on this one, I've got href, and even if I put it on a line by itself, the end of it ends right here. And I really cannot, you don't want to put a carriage return inside a quote. So I'm going to make this as close to as I can. So what I did here is I put the whole href attribute on one line, and it still went over 80. That's the case where it's okay, right? You want to avoid any lines longer than 80 characters, but you can't get rid of them entirely. And this is one of those cases where you won't get rid of it entirely. Here I can get rid of this one because these can be on different lines. And this one, again, my href one is going to be too long, but I can go ahead and put my target on a different line. Oh, look, that one's going to work. I put the target on my href was short enough to fit on 80, just barely. Notice it's on column 78, so it did have a couple extra spaces. And then I want to get, so break the lines where you can. And here I don't need that paragraph, that closing paragraph on the end, so I can bring it up. And there I've cleaned it up so that I don't go over my 80 lines, except in the case where it was non-optional. All right, so that's how you add A-links. There are 2 more A-links, but these are different ones. So let's talk about these. These are going to be graphic links, which means they're going to contain an image. And so we won't be able to do that till we know how to do images.